As a 19-year-old, the rock slash jazz guitarist, and is that when NEC I got a chance to get exposed to a lot more unusual music and also very usual classical music that I knew nothing about. So it's great to be here, to have friends and colleagues and teachers in the audience. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to play two excerpts of recent pieces, or maybe not so recent anymore, and then I'm going to end up with my recent orchestra piece. So I have a few, before we even start, I have a few scores, which I'm going to leave here. This will be just an excerpt of it, so it may be hard to find where we are. The main piece which I'm going to play, it's here. I have two scores. Right. So this will be the last one, and the string quartet. I have quite a few scores, and I actually have a photocopy of my manuscript, for better or for worse. Okay, so what I want to talk about today is, is it okay if I sit here?
Totally, go ahead. Yeah, totally.
What I want to talk about today is the processes of translation of extra musical models in my recent composition. So I will start with this piece Onda for orchestra from 2005. So a quite old piece. And in this piece I just use this as the most naive way. Onda means wave. So it basically is one short little piece for orchestra, about 7 minutes long, that uses as naively as possible and as intuitively as possible just the shape of a wave to control ondulating melodies, gestures, volume, and by volume I don't mean dynamic volume, instrumental volume of the orchestra, amounts of instruments building up the timbre. And like metaphoric scenes, like a calm before the storm. So in a way, it's very much a tone poem. Not even like an overture with a tone poem vibe to it. It's my first orchestra piece, so I'll just play a little bit of that for us to listen a bit. So, John, can you help me?
Yeah, totally.
So, track 4. And if we could start somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, sure.
Also the waves of it is very much intervallically put together, which I do not do anymore. So a manipulation of sets of intervals that expand and contract in a, let's say, wave-like way. So anywhere in
The middle, right?
This is the beginning though. example of use of something extra musical to create more specific musical objects, but still very much intuitive, and I would consider an old style of at least of what I'm trying to do now. Now the next piece is called Translate. It's my second string quartet, and the title refers to so slate. So starting from a blank slate is this obsession that composers have. Starting from scratch, and in this piece I proposed starting from spaces between two mediums, so interpretative states in motion between something that maybe it's already exists, but it takes interpretation and it becomes something else once that happens. This is also my first piece with electronics. Also maybe the last one. The idea was to try to write a piece and incorporate the two very different sound worlds of electronics and instrumental writing. And by that I decided very early on the composition which kind of electronic processes I wanted to use. And those became metaphors for different sections of the instrumental part. So, I mean, it's a long story, but and I don't have time to go too much into this piece, but I created this structure with a specific set of proportions that, let's say, the first section of the piece will use like chorus effect. So chorus effect is what is when, for example, you have the string orchestra, they're all playing slightly out of tune, slightly with different attacks, and so in this rubbing of the sounds against each other generates this lush sound from the difference between these intonations. So I use that as a metaphor for example the first section of the piece by using double stops in all of the string instruments. So we have an 8-note unison, plus they are singing on the top of the. So by this you create little beatings, and which then can be later manipulated in other ways and so forth. So ring modulation, idea of delays, idea of loops. Like music will just get stuck in a simple repeat, for example, but I will compose this repeat in a way that it's more or less interesting, the way that things happen. And then the other thing is the idea of an extra musical structure. So I use the so-called self-similar proportions or fractal proportions, in which the form of the entire piece, so I have, let's say, X amount of seconds for the chorus section, X amount of seconds for the ring modulation section, X amount of seconds for the loop, and this way I lay down a piece. This is in a pre-composition way. Then it means that once I get this set of proportions, I take them, let's go back to the first section of the chorus section, and I will take the same set of proportions and subdivide this section with the same proportions of the entire piece. So we get a set of proportions, but not only that, so we get, it would be nice to draw and make, but let's say the piece is 10 minutes and it was subdivided in a certain way. So the first section of the piece, if it's 1 minute, we're going to subdivide them with the same proportions. So we're going to have very tiny, a piece that is very highly subdivided, first of all. And also I use this to create like meta instruments and create counterpoint of characters. For example, if they are all divided by the entire piece, and if, let's say, the order is chorus, ring modulation, loops, delays, so on, then once we subdivide the first section, and then it means that the first section will be a counterpoint of itself with chorus against chorus, and then chorus section against chorus subsection. What does it mean for me? So I really amplify the idea of a chorus character in that part of the piece. As we move on, still in this section, we have, let's say, the background of chorus against now ring modulation. So what does it mean for me, given the materials, given the sounds that I set up, which I'll talk about in a second? What does it mean, this counterpoint, when I'm writing this piece at this particular measure? So as the piece goes along, more and more materials are accumulated. and they get a life of its own, because once music is written and it's there, that is the piece. The piece is not the pre-composition process. The piece is just this method of destroying the pre-composition form by trying to interpret from very, very general, and little by little it crystallizes itself into something more specific. So once I laid down this entire plan, I decided to add a composed accident right in the let's say in the golden section of the piece. So this composed accident is actually where the electronics come in. So consider the entire piece, it's 10 minutes, so about 6.5 minutes, there is like a big electronic apotheosis where all of these effects come in a very condensed space. And by the way, this piece is written in two versions, a version with electronics and a version without electronics. And they're identical. I wrote the piece in a way that it would work without electronics so that it would be easier to take on the road and things like that. So that means if there's this accident in the golden section of the piece, so every little section will also have this accident, but instead of with all of the effects of the electronic processes, it will contain only the process for that one section. So the chorus section will have all of these chorus metaphors played by string quartets, but it will also have a chorus accident for a split second. It's also proportional to the big picture, this big electronic accident. So if it's 1 minute, then it will be very short in the subsections. So in a way, composing the piece was dealing with deconstructing this idea of the electronic processes and try to create timbres and gestures and overall characters based on the idea of an electronic process. So I'm going to play a little bit of this and then move on to